So again, if you've just joined us, welcome to our informational webinar on the 2026 NIHHIS Heat Tabletop Exercise Design Challenge. And once again, that QR code on the, excuse me, sorry, it is deactivated. I'm sorry about that. I thought it was activated. Well, maybe one of our team members can put the link to the heat exercise design challenge in the chat, but if not, it's just the website to the challenge itself to give folks an opportunity to follow along. Apologies that the QR code is deactivated, but we will just, if you can just go to that web page, or you could just listen along and follow it later, that's fine too. So I'm Maggie Allen. I'm a Climate and Health Program Policy Manager with NOAA's Climate Program Office. And like I said, today is our informational webinar on the challenge, which I am managing. So a little bit of background about who we are. As I said, I work for NOAA's Climate Program Office, but I also work with the National Integrated Heat Health Information System, or NIHHIS, which was launched in 2015 by NOAA and the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention for a coordinated approach to heat resilience. NIHHIS works across disciplines, government agencies, and non-governmental partners to build societal understanding of heat risks, develop science-based solutions, and improves capacity, communication, and decision-making in order to reduce heat-related illness and death. And so we are the host of this challenge, and a bit of history about how we got started with doing tabletop exercises on heat. It basically all started back in the fall of 2021, when NOAA and state local partners convened roundtable events across the country, and heat was the focus of 2 of the regions. These exercises and roundtable events built on prior NIHHIS urban heat island mapping campaigns and an existing community of practice and enhanced them. They were developed by teams organized by the Regional Collaboration Network of NOAA, led by climate service directors and NIHHIS as well. For these exercises, the Weather Service and the weather forecasting offices were deeply involved in every location, and they helped with local connectivity and continuity. These exercises were also very unique because community-based organizations represented their constituencies and were literally at the table from start to finish of these exercises. They also focused on place-based solutions and new model practices. So our tabletop exercises looked something like this, especially in the beginning. Each tabletop exercise had a situation manual, which some of you are probably very familiar with, and that was the guide for the exercise. Day 1 of the exercise focused on the event response. There was an overview of expectations. The Weather Forecasting Office set up the scenario and the forecast for the heat event. There was a plenary discussion of information and roles. We went over the scenario and its impacts, and then broke out into groups, and we identified gaps and prioritization. Day 2 was focused on long-term planning, and this is where our exercises also really stood out as unique from other exercises, because this is where we put heat into a long-term resilience context. So our exercises aren't just about addressing heat in the short term and responding to a heat event and being more prepared for that, but also looking at heat long-term and how to build resilience. So on day 2, we continued breakouts to elaborate on gaps and opportunities. We had a detailed discussion and planning to address those gaps. And then finally, there was an exercise wrap-up and closing thoughts. And so before I get into the details, I wanted to say that we have been able to support over 17 exercises across the country since 2022. The ones you can see on the map in blue are the ones we've been able to directly support. So the ones I mentioned just previously as part of those original pilots, those were Phoenix, Arizona, Las Vegas, Nevada, Charleston, South Carolina, and Miami, Florida. And then over the next couple of years, we continued to provide direct support to communities like in Seattle, Oklahoma City, Philadelphia, and then this spring, we also were able to support Raleigh, North Carolina in a tabletop. And then I'll dive into a little bit more about the challenge we did in 2024. That was kind of the prequel to this event, this challenge we're doing now. But with that challenge, we were able to support 10 communities across the country, and you can see those in red. And as you can see, and I'll again dive more into this challenge in a minute, but that had a really wide geographical reach, all the way from San Juan, Puerto Rico to Pierce County, Washington, and a little bit everywhere in between. All right, so now I'm going to talk a little bit about that challenge competition. So in 2024, like I said, we were able to run a challenge competition where local governments were required to co-develop a situation manual or a SITMAN with a local community-based organization that worked with a community or a population that was at risk to extreme heat. We evaluated and the situation manuals that were submitted, and that was the main deliverable that was considered for the prize. But just like this 2026 challenge, it was just one part of a longer process to execute a full tabletop exercise. So the top 10 communities each received a $20,000 prize to plan and host their own tabletop exercise. As you saw on the last slide, those were all the communities, and I'll dive into that in a bit too. But most of them all ran their exercise last summer of 2025. So these are the winners. As you saw on the map, there was a wide geographical diversity, but I just wanted to briefly mention as well the kinds of organizations that did win that prize in 2024. As I mentioned, in 2024, it was a requirement that a local government organization had to co-submit and co-develop with a nonprofit organization. That's not a requirement this year, and I'll get to that in a minute. But as you can see here, the list of winners is a city or county office partnered with an organization that most likely represents an at-risk group. So you have a housing organization in Mobile, Alabama, American Red Cross in California, a church in Baltimore, a coalition for health in Austin, which you're going to hear about in a minute, and other organizations. And on that, like I said, you're about to hear from Austin. You're about to hear from Austin right now. So we're really happy to have Mark Cordair with us. He helped run the Austin Tabletop Challenge last year. He was a successful prize winner for the 2024 challenge. So I'm going to pass it over to Mark to talk about his perspective on receiving prize money to run a challenge, receiving prize money from the challenge competition and running an exercise last year.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Yeah, this was very transformative for us. We never expected it to be as engaging as it was, but I think that's sort of part of this process and also part of sort of letting go and letting other people own it. So I'm Mark Cordair. I'm with the Austin Climate Action and Resilience within the city of Austin, and I work a lot on how heat impacts our assets and operations, but also how it impacts our community members. For this project, I brought in public health and emergency management, but I think the key was the community organization. Next slide. So when this came up, I reached out to this organization we've worked with before called Community Coalition for Health. And I said, hey, there's this potential funding. We want to do role playing around heat. For the city of Austin, it's really hard for us to receive funding and then harder for us to actually give it out to community members. So we said, hey, the money's going to come straight to you, and then we're going to co-create this thing. And surprisingly, they were super excited about it. Almost a little too excited about it at first, because I got a little bit nervous when they were talking about all these exercises and all these things they're going to do. And I kept on pushing like, well, what exactly are we going to finish with? So they got super excited about it. They put together these flyers, did a lot of outreach, and then we co-created an outline to run a show that talked about heat, sort of heat climate projections, but also preparedness, response, and recovery, and how this all gets together. Next slide. So I mentioned the enthusiasm. They created a map that kind of looks like Austin, but it's not Austin. It's Sunnyvale. And everything was sort of Austin, but Sunnyvale. So we have the Austin city limits, but they had the Sunnyvale city limits, so SCL. And so as they rolled this out, they really focused on, let's pretend it's October 18th, which is typically not too hot in Austin. It gets a little bit nicer. And that we hit 110 degrees really fast, so fast that community members are caught off guard. We have the Sunnyvale county limits. In Austin, we have the ACL, which is this huge festival with 75,000 people a day. It's outside. Here, it's you'll see on the southwest part of the map. But also, the role playing is that in East Austin, there's also a heat wave, but also a power outage. So you have this balance between tourists in the bottom left and then community members who tend to have the least amount of resources on the east side who are impacted by power outage. And they really sort of took this to the next level. Next slide. They decided to have essentially personas where half the people, so all the community members would be city staff and all the city staff would be community members. So as they walk in, we would just hand them a pamphlet. If I as a city employee, I could either be a community organizer, a person experiencing homelessness, a single parent. If I was a single parent, I'd automatically get an emo. You'll see the dolls in the bottom right. College student, outdoor worker. And then the community members, as they walked in, they were handed either like a utility manager, a mayor or a city council, a senior center director, a public health official, or an emergency management coordinator. And essentially, we did a lot of role playing throughout. And it was sort of broken up into 3 sections. Preparedness, like how do you experience heat and how do you think about heat? What do you do during a response? And then, how do you recover and how do we actually help people get past the heat impact? Next slide. So since they had access to a community center, they essentially redesigned their space to be these different things. On the right-hand side, that purple area, that was where we all met. That's also where we debriefed afterwards. And you'll see in the map, there's these areas like the yellow in the middle, that's the East Side Cooling Center. So you can imagine on the East Side, it might not have as many sort of amenities for people who are experiencing heat. In the bottom left, you'll see a West Coast Cooling Center that had like popsicles and nice comfy chairs and extra cool. And then we had these breakout rooms where people would meet in different sections. We end up only using 3 of them. That's the bottom one, the gray one. That's the picture you see on the top right. And then we have these breakout rooms, 1 and 2 and 3. And then we also had a hospital, like somebody in there who's pretending to be the hospital, and people would come in during triage during an event. And this all sort of worked together. But the other piece, which I was also a little bit worried about, but worked out well, you'll see on the bottom right, you'll see these 4 chairs out in the parking lot. Before we even started, people had to experience what heat was like. So some people were tasked with, hey, we got to sit at a bus stop for 5 minutes in the heat and pretend you're waiting for a bus. And, so imagine if you had an emo or a kid, or if you're unhoused, you had to sit there for 5 minutes. Other people had to go outside, put on like backpacks full of water and pretend they're construction workers. I mean, obviously it was all in fun and it's safe, but it also sort of drove home, what is it like to actually experience heat? Next slide. So then we brought them back in and we had them do role playing. Like if you're a city council member, you imagine that you have a festival and then people are starting to like pass out at the festival and they're starting to get emergency management calls. Meanwhile, the East Side has blackouts. Like, what do you do? What are your immediate priorities? How do you communicate that? And like, how does that actually strain your resources? But then also flip that for somebody who's unhoused. They were supposed to imagine it's 110 degrees outside. They couldn't find a place to sleep last night because it was way too hot. Now they're running out of water and they're starting to feel woozy. What do they do? What is their immediate priorities? How do they get communicated to? And then what do they do during an event? And what was most surprising in how people stuck to character. And I want to talk about this picture for a second, because the woman on the left in blue, she's pretending to be a council member. She's coming in and yelling at the city manager, the guy's pretending to be the city manager. So you can see him leaning back and be like, why are you yelling at me? Meanwhile, this woman in the back is like, oh, I'm out. She's like, I don't want to be in the middle of this. Now, it was all in due fun, but people really took those characters really seriously and tried to figure out, like, what do they actually do? Next slide. So based on that, we start to hear things like, hey, we really need to like focus on early warning and risk perception. People didn't really perceive heat as risk. We said cooling centers and people were like, what's a cooling center? Like, what does it even mean? Like, what are those communication channels? What are the sort of access to barriers or barrier access? Like, how does equity play into that? And what is the preparedness infrastructure? So we start to hear recommendations, strengthen multilingual communication, really sort of think about familiar faces at familiar places. How do we activate trusted messengers? Clarify what a cooling center is, and really think about pre-season cooling kits. How to get people thinking about it before it gets hot. Some of the quotes we heard is like, if I stay for lunch, can I stay overnight? A lot of sort of talks about people experiencing homelessness. I need more information about alerts themselves. Like, how do I tell my friends and family about it? Next slide. So while that was for preparedness, for response, we did sort of other exercises, sort of walking through scenarios of like, hey, you are this person, ask the question as if you're that person. And we start to realize there's a lot of sort of cascading impacts we're starting to hear. Resource competition. As we have these blackouts in East Austin and West Austin, a lot of more press is going to this big events. Emergency management is getting pulled over there. That means the mayor and council members are getting pulled over there. And that this more ubiquitous impact on the East Side is getting less resources. So how do we start to integrate local community partners into this so that we're not always dependent on emergency management? And then how do we deploy like mobile cooling centers so that these cooling centers themselves, like if you can't just walk there, if you live a mile away, how do you start to deploy mobile outreach? And then really sort of think about what does that equity audit look like, and then how do we get partnerships to do mass gatherings? Like, hey, how do we ensure everybody's is part of this conversation so that we're not exchanging business cards during an event, but we're actually thinking about it ahead of time? So how do you get fans to people? Like what is the mental load of heat? And that's really real for some people. So how do you really think about exhaustion and communication? Next slide. And what was interesting is that while we took a lot of notes, I think there was a lot of sort of post discussion later. At the event itself, we probably had 3/4 of the people were community members and a quarter were city staff. And there was a lot of sort of just clearly like being honest about what heat is. And there's this sort of phrase around like, hey, heat doesn't discriminate, but response does. So how do we ensure that we're, as a city and staff, are really sort of thinking about who needs to know what and when, and how do we sort of get community organizations into that conversation ahead of time? But also on the community side, they realize they can't just depend on us to constantly be there if we have competing needs across a whole city. So how do they work with their local organizations or churches or YMCAs or whatever to really sort of make sure that those people who are most vulnerable, be it pregnant, be it elderly, people who are socially isolated or medically vulnerable, how do we ensure that somebody's started checking in on them to make sure they're safe? So we had this event. We had invited Mercy Management. Mercy Management was so impressed that they held their own tabletop exercise about 5 months later, where it's almost like the flip. Rather than 75% community members, 1/4 city staff, it was actually 75% city staff and 1/4 community members. And while it's better to have 50-50, at least the Mercy Management realized there's so much value to sort of living through what is actually happening in the community. And then we had a third tabletop exercise just focused on the unhoused in downtown, all because of this. And for that one, we realized that for downtown area, politicians don't want the unhoused to congregate outside somewhere. And then, so what happens is that all these providers or resources only open for a couple hours and then they shut down. So you can imagine one organization is open from 10 to 1, another organization is open from 2 to 4, and that these groups of unhoused are moving through downtown, the hottest place of Austin, in a time that's just hot. So we had a workshop, a tabletop based on this, or like walking through how do people experience the heat, and then how do we ensure that we're meeting people where they are when it's hot to ensure that they're safe. So lessons learned. There's so much value in role playing. It's fun, it's interesting, but it's also gets people really thinking about what's the personal experience. And two, puts people in the other person's shoes. So they're not just saying, you should do this. It's more like, we should do this together. And while we have a lot of notes and we put together the report, I think this just sort of elevates the need to do this more. And there's been a lot of interest in doing this pre-season every single year going forward. So thank you so much for the opportunity. It's been lovely. Happy to share the report with you if you have any questions.
Thank you so much, Mark. We do have a couple of minutes if anyone wants to ask questions for Mark right now, although we'll also have time for questions at the end, where Mark will stay on. But Mark, I did see one question in already, I think from a participant asking if you chose to do the exercise in the cooler season rather than the heat season due to the grant timeline, or for a different reason. And I can also chime in on some of that, but yeah, they want to know why you chose to do it in the cooler season.
Well, September is not cooler season. It was still it was still 90 degrees, feels like 95 in September. It just became September and not June and August or July, August, because they got overexcited about it and it became unwieldy to some degree. So we kept on pushing it back, but we finally landed on it. And then, right now it's 94. It feels like 98 in Austin, maybe 100. So it is always hot. So we weren't worried about not being hot in September.
Thank you. Yeah, and I will get into this in a minute too. In fact, I think my next slide covers some of it, but in terms of, because it's not technically a grant, it's a challenge prize, we don't have a timeline requirement for when you would run your exercises. Like I said, I think everyone who did win the challenge in 2024 ran theirs in the summer-ish of 2025, some in spring, some late summer, like Mark in the September. We do not have a requirement on when you'd have to run it. It is up to you all, but I'll get to some best practices in a minute. And yes, I also see a question. There will be a recording. This is being recorded, so we will post this webinar on heat.gov on the challenge webpage afterwards. So you will get a recording of this presentation. Does anyone else have any quick questions for Mark, or else I can keep going and you could ask him questions as well towards the end. All right. Well, not seeing any. Thank you again so much, Mark. Yeah, they had a really, unfortunately, none of us, I think, on our NOAA team were able to attend the Austin exercise last year, but it was a really innovative, creative exercise, as you just heard. And I think they were probably one of the more creative ones where they did role playing and they did these, scenario based discussions. A lot of the exercises that we see and have worked with are more kind of maybe run of the mill tabletop exercises where you just run through an event and you don't role play as someone else, which is perfectly fine. But we also love to see this creativity, especially this round. We'd love to see this more kind of role playing creative events if you're able to, but also perfectly fine if you just want to do a standard exercise where you are coming as yourself as well. Well, we do have one more question, Mark, for you, asking what specific items were included in the preseason cooling kits.
So Austin Public Health has preseason cooling kits, and right now it's a bag with, I think there's a hat, bottled water, mosquito spray, a cooling towel, and then just a couple of pamphlets about information about what to look out, what is heat stress, what's a heat stroke, etc. And then we adjust it over time. We have a group going out today to test what we should put in heat bags for the unhoused going forward. And something that's coming up is like knockoff Crocs, because that tends to be a big issue for the unhoused. But yeah, we adjust our cooling kits over time based on what we hear and based on need.
All right, thank you. We'll move on for now, and then again, you can keep asking questions to Mark at the end. So like I said, I do want to dive into a little bit of overall best practices we've learned from supporting these tabletops over the last 4+ years. And on heat.gov, on the Heat Action Planning webpage, which I'll bring up at the end of this webinar, and I think it's also linked on the challenge webpage as well, there is a heat tabletop exercise lessons learned and best practices guide, which contains this information. So hopefully it's a helpful resource for you. But I want to go through some of the best practices we've gleaned from supporting these exercises over the years, and that will hopefully help you develop a successful situation manual. So again, participants provided feedback through after action reports and other avenues on how to improve the effectiveness of tabletop exercises. That's reported within this document. So the first one is to choose a meaningful time and place. And this is kind of what we were talking about earlier, and hopefully help us answer the question in the chat as well. So the timing of an exercise can really help influence the outcome of the discussion and should be specific to each community's needs. As I mentioned, we don't have a requirement on when you could host your exercise, but maybe an area that's recently dealt with a heat event, participants may be more easily able to recall what went well and what didn't in their heat response. Other communities may prefer to host an exercise ahead of heat season so they can maximize opportunities to incorporate ideas from the exercise into their preparedness strategy. And then, as I noted in the beginning, we started with these exercises and they were 2-day events. And these were able to provide a lot of time for thoughtful discussions without causing people to feel rushed. However, a lot of the challenges, I think most of the challenge winners we supported in 2024 and 2025 ended up doing a 1-day event. And they said that was because they wanted more people to attend, because people couldn't just fit 2 days into their busy schedules. So having a 1-day event made it more likely that people could attend and really dive into one day. And we've sometimes seen 1.5 days as the sweet spot. Raleigh, North Carolina did 1.5 days, where the first day was really an information setting about heat and about all the resources you can use on heat. And then day 2 was the exercise itself. So again, it's really up to you. I think the template might encourage 2 days, but we've seen 1 day work well as well. And then the location of the exercise can also help influence who shows up for the discussions and how collaborative it is. So, for example, a central location may be more accessible to a wide variety of participants than one on the outskirts of the city. Participants also noted the value in building connections. So, most participants came from a variety of backgrounds to attend these exercises. Most prominent were emergency management and public health. And in some cases, utility groups, private sector organizations, transit agencies, schools, hospitals, and clinics were not at these exercises. And many noted that there was still a lack of community members who are most likely to be impacted by heat, even though, as I said, we tried to make sure that these exercises really had community-based organizations at the table, especially those challenge winners, right, who were co-developing it. But even so, there was still a lack of members there who should have been there, who were most at risk to heat. So participants also noted that it would be extra helpful to have policymakers, leadership, elected officials attend as well, because these exercises really help build lasting connections and relationships. And on that note, participants really stressed the importance of spending time getting to know one another during these exercises. They highlighted the value of engaged discussions, and they recommended training facilitators to find creative ways to elicit information and encouraging collaboration with everyone in the room. And this helps build trust and get people to know each other, because otherwise you might just stay at your table the whole time and chat with one another and not meet everyone in the room. So lots of times for networking and building connections. The other one is to focus on scenario-based discussions. And so this is a requirement of the challenge. So hopefully this is going to be in all your situation manuals, because we do want to see a fictional but realistic extreme heat emergency scenario in the situation manual. So participants focusing on a real-world actual event helps them address the most severe challenges of extreme heat. However, participants did note sometimes that discussions could go on tangents when breakout groups were going on, and they might discuss strategies that were unrelated to the scenario. So these conversations can be helpful, but they encourage facilitators to help participants stay on topic. Also, to build capacity and authority for resilience. So heat governance really varies from location to location. So participants should focus on the heat forecast resources and relevant emergency response strategies that are specific to their location. And doing so can help participants find localized, tailored solutions to build capacity and determine authority ahead of heat events. Participants should also remember that during real-world heat events, they often need to focus on multiple hazards at once and use investments efficiently. And this is also something we're incorporating into our challenge requirement this year, is that you incorporate a compounding or cascading hazard into your scenario, which I'll talk about in a minute. But making sure that there is a compounding or cascading hazard also addressed as well as heat can help the community become more resilient to other realistic hazards, which makes it more sustainable and realistic and a better long-term investment. And then lastly, participants really encourage opportunities for further training and collaboration. They've said they really want to see these exercises conducted annually. As Mark said, a tabletop exercise spurred others as well, which is what we want to see. And so we hope that these exercises can develop channels or convening spaces for continued discussions afterwards. So any way to make that happen is a best practice. All right, and so now I'm going to dive into this year's challenge. So again, I'm just going to be reading from the challenge webpage and so hopefully you'll be able to follow along, and this is all on the webpage. So I'm not really saying anything new here, but I just want to highlight some of the key points that I hope you take home with you today. So again, we are seeking submissions of situation manuals or SITMANs for a heat tabletop exercise. Just like in 2024, the situation manual is the deliverable that will be evaluated and considered for a prize, but it is just one part of a longer process to execute a full exercise. This year, we're hopefully able to support more than we did in 2024, as up to 40 winners may be selected. The overall number of winners will evenly divide a total cash prize pool of $1 million. So if we are hopefully able to select 40 winners, then each winner will receive $25,000. If there are less than 40 that are deemed acceptable to fund, then we'll still be evenly dividing that cash prize pool of $1 million. So some of these rules, and hopefully this is important information for you all. So any US-based organization is eligible to submit. However, the project must be focused on a specific locality, like a city, county, state, tribal community, certain area, region, that is dealing with heat and a compounding and or cascading issue. We especially would love to see submissions from rural and coastal communities. Eligible authors and organizations can include community-based organizations, a non-federal, state, local, tribal, or territorial government representative, K through 12 or academic institution, the private sector, and public works representative. However, if you are a community-based organization and you are applying, or if you're not a local government, we do really want to see that you are involving leaders or decision makers who are invested in addressing heat resilience at a local government level, because those are the people who may be able to implement heat resilience within your community. And same goes with if you are not a community-based organization or not a nonprofit that is working with a community that's at risk to extreme heat. We would love to see that you work with a community-based organization on the submission, or that they are involved in the exercise as well, as that might strengthen your submission, that you are working with those community members as well. It must be led by a U.S. citizen or permanent resident who is 18 years of age or older. And then you will have to convert the situation manual document from Word, which is how you'll access it now in the beginning, into PDF, as that is the only way you're able to submit on heat.gov is through a PDF. And again, there is a provided template in Word document that you're welcome to use, but that will have to be converted to PDF in order to be received. So each application will be scored for each category identified in the judging guidelines, and a final overall score for each application will be calculated as a weighted average according to the percentages in the guidelines. And we are hoping, like I said, to fund up to 40 applications who will receive an equal portion of the prize pool. And then a panel of judges made up of various subject matter experts will evaluate the submissions on the criteria listed under judging on the web page. And I'll just go through these really quickly so you know what we're looking for. So 10% goes to completeness. And this is something we're hopefully going to be able to address even before it goes to the judges, because this is really just seeing if your situation manual contains the components in the template and that it was a complete and finished product with all necessary details included. And like I said, especially this year, we want to see that it is addressing not just extreme heat, but a compounding and or cascading hazard. 20% goes to an extreme yet realistic scenario that could happen in a community within the next decade. So a power outage causing a surge in the need for shelters and hospital beds is a realistic scenario. A tsunami that affects the middle of Nebraska is probably not going to happen with an extreme heat event, so that's not super realistic. Did you use climate and weather information from accurate sources like heat.gov or other scientific web pages to talk about the heat and the climate information to develop a baseline heat event? And then 30% goes to creativity and detail, which is the highest percentage we're doing here, because we really want to see scenarios that provide interesting and thoughtful examples of cascading and compounding impacts. We'd love to see scenarios developed in a way that's innovative and structured, and that the techniques used are encouraging collaboration and discussion. Bonus points if you can propose a interesting or heat relevant location to host the exercise in, like an emergency operations center or a cooling center. We don't expect you to have reserved the room quite yet or anything like that, but if you propose somewhere that you'd like to have it hold, we recognize things may change, but that could help as well. 20% goes to actionable. So we want to see that the scenario is appropriate for an exercise that is focused both on the short-term planning and preparedness as well as longer-term heat risk mitigation. As I mentioned in the beginning, we do want to see both. We also want to know that planners have identified clear objectives for the exercise and plans they wish to test with the exercise. And lastly, 20% goes to representativeness. We want to see that your scenario accurately represents the populations in your community and their risks. And that, like I said, we'd love to see that they are included in the development of the scenario, even if they're not a submitting author. All right, so how to submit. So hopefully this is pretty straightforward on heat.gov. If you submitted or were familiar in 2024, you used to have to submit these kind of things through challenge.gov, which actually no longer exists. So now government agencies support these challenges on their web pages directly. So you'll just go to the Submit Your Entry tab under the Submit Your Entry under the How to Enter tab on the challenge web page. There's a Google form there that you'll fill out, and there are required fields. And then when you get to the end of the Google form, you'll submit your situation manual, which again will only accept a PDF. And that will include logistical information on how you would run your exercise. And all of these things are listed in the template. So if you don't choose to use the template, just please make sure you kind of include these details in your exercise as well. And if your community already has an existing heat plan, that'd be great to mention as well. You can talk about how maybe your exercise may be testing that heat plan. Or if you don't have a heat plan or you're not very far along on building heat resilience, that's totally fine. But we want to know how this exercise may lead to the development of one. And the deadline is August 12th, 2026 at 11:59 p.m. Eastern. So as long as you hit submit in that Google form by then, you will be eligible, as long as you meet the other requirements. All right, and apologies if this QR code doesn't work either. I thought it did, but apologies if it doesn't. I haven't checked it right now since the one in the beginning didn't work, but this is just leading to the heat action planning webpage on heat.gov, which is just a really great page for you to read through a lot of important resources that could help you develop your situation manual. And also a lot of these resources are also linked on the challenge webpage as well. So the Introduction to Heat Tabletop Planning Coordination Guide can help you plan your tabletop exercise. The one I mentioned earlier, the Lessons Learned and Best Practices Guide, highlights everything we've learned from supporting these exercises. There's lots of great situation manuals and other after-action reports on that webpage as well. We particularly highlighted Miami's because it was a great example of one of the pilot cities that ran a situation manual, but you can see a lot of others on that webpage as well. There's also NOAA's Maturity Model for Heat Governance, which is a great resource that can demonstrate how local governments can build heat resilience. And then there's lots of other helpful resources at other web pages. Like I said, we do have the situation manual template, which is provided on the challenge page. The heat risk tool is a great way for some forecasting. We have NOAA Climate at a Glance or Climate Explorer for more long-term forecasting. And then there's lots of other pages on heat.gov that may be helpful as well, such as a page to tell you who is most at risk to extreme heat, and urban heat island mapping campaign reports that could help you, especially if your city community has already ran an urban heat island mapping campaign. That may be very useful. So once again, the deadline is August 12th, 2026 at 11:59 p.m. Eastern. We have a pretty tight timeline after that because we have to make sure everyone receives the funding by the end of our federal fiscal year. So the judging and selection period will be a few weeks after that, hopefully ending around September 4th. So by September 11th or so, you should be hearing if you have been awarded a challenge, the prize. And like I said in the beginning, once you've heard that, you may run your exercise anytime you wish after you receive the funding. Again, this is not a grant, so we don't have any hardcore reporting requirements or timeline requirements. If you have won a prize, we will work with you to make sure you get that money into your bank account, and then you may run that exercise at any time. As I said, most last year decided to run it in the summer, but it is up to you when you want to run that exercise. It does take about 4 to 6 months to probably do the whole planning process, but maybe you've already started it and you want to do it sooner or you want to do it later. It's totally up to you. And again, apologies if this QR code doesn't work, but it once again leads to the Tabletop Challenge webpage that I've mentioned a few times and you hopefully have bookmarked. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me directly, or better yet, email our whole team at NIHHIS@noaa.gov, because that reaches everyone on our team. So you'll be more likely to get a timely response as well, because a few of us are monitoring that email within business hours. So I'm going to take a drink of water, and then I see some questions coming in, and I'll answer them in just a minute. And then if anyone has questions for Mark as well, I'll call on Mark and he can hop back on and answer questions specific to his exercise or what it was like as a practitioner. And with that, Mark, I'm gonna ask you first. There's a question about how you funded the preliminary planning with the community.
Well, interesting enough, when we got the grant, the money went directly to Community Coalition for Health immediately. So yeah, they had the money in hand already. So that money went towards planning and implementation.
Thank you. And yes, to clarify, so the prize money, there's a question if the prize money is to be used solely to conduct the exercise. Well, we hope so, but again, this is not a grant, so we can't actually mandate that you use this money to run the exercise. but we assume if you've put the work in and developed a successful situation manual that is going to be used to conduct the exercise, we do hope you use the prize money to do so. We know that some folks last year maybe didn't utilize all their $20,000 to do the exercise, so they maybe divided the money up a little bit afterwards to support other heat-related initiatives, which is completely fine. It is really up to you how you choose to use that prize money. We hope that most of it goes to the exercise, but we do not have any reporting requirements or a requirement to see a budget or anything like that for you to the situation manual is what you would receive the prize money for, not the exercise itself. Regional entities made up of many cities and counties, like Council of Governments, regional planning councils, are they eligible? Yes, they are eligible. Again, it's pretty much if you, as long as you're not a you're not the U.S. federal government, and you're not a non-U.S. organization, you are eligible to apply as long as this, Council of Governments or Regional Planning Council is kind of making it clear in the submission what locality or larger locality they are working in to address heat. Volunteer fire rescue departments are eligible applicants. Yes, I believe so. Again, I think if you draft a successful situation manual and you fall under any of those eligible criteria of organizations, you'd be eligible as well. Someone asked, can we send a draft SIPMAN that we would make updates to later if we are still in the planning phase, but foundation of exercises there, conducting it in 2027? Yes, that's fine too. We do expect a lot of updates to be made to these situation manuals. I'm pretty sure the 2024 competition, we stayed in touch with all of the winners, and I heard updates from all of them, and they sent me many updates of their situation manual. There was a Los Angeles tabletop exercise that was successful at the time. They wanted to focus on the Olympics, but then the wildfires hit in LA, and they kind of pivoted and changed their exercise to be heat and wildfire because of how devastating the wildfires were. Similar examples were kind of across the country like that. So it's definitely, we expect it to be an iterative process as long as the situation manual kind of meets that criteria and is a strong, robust situation manual that would have it rank highly to judges. That's fine. We expect it to be a draft and that there will be updates later. Can a non-U.S. citizen permanent resident work with a community organization on the submission, like a faculty at a university on a visa working with community organizations? I believe so. I think the main submitter, so in the Google form, you'll see required fields that are require the main submitter to fill out their information. I think they would need to be a U.S. citizen and permanent resident, but you can have a secondary submitter or people working to help you with the situation manual be non-U.S. citizen or permanent resident, as long as the organization receiving the funds and doing the tabletop exercise is a U.S. based organization. But certainly non-U.S. citizen permanent residents can help with the submission and work with the community organizations. We just need that main submitter to be one, as well as the organization receiving the funds. Can the award be used for something other than the tabletop exercise? We already have funding for that. Well, like I said, there's no requirement that the award be used for the tabletop exercise. However, because you are submitting a situation manual that explains how you would run an exercise, that would be the judges and our selection would prioritize that because that's what you're putting the time into to develop. Again, we can't track if you use the awards for another heat-related activity, but we do expect that this is going to be the beginning part of you running an exercise, and we would prioritize organizations that mention that up front because that is what we want to see. And I'll also mention that I did kind of talk about this, even though we don't have a requirement you meet with us or anything like that, especially if we support 40 communities, there'll be a lot of people running exercises. We will be hosting kind of an introduction call where everyone can meet each other and talk about it like we did last time. We had an intro call, we had like a midsummer call, and then we had an end of summer call where we all talked about how it went, and everyone did run their exercise. So we do kind of hope to have conversation, have collaboration going, and you'd be invited into our community of practices that we have on heat. So how many pages, how thorough are the situation manuals? So you can see on the web page, the the template. It's really up to you how long you'd like it. I will say, judges will be reviewing a lot of these in a short amount of time. So the more concise you can be, probably the better. Again, this doesn't need to be a lengthy grant proposal narrative. We really just want to see you addressing the key points in the situation manual. So the template right now is, it's about 10 to 15 pages, I think, and then you can look on the heat.gov heat action planning webpage and see what the others are like, and those are kind of our best practices. So if you look at those, that would be what you want to kind of aim for a situation manual. And again, we didn't post the challenge winner situation manuals on the webpage, but if you reach out to me or Mark as well, like he can share with you his situation manual and things like that. I can share those. We just didn't post those publicly, but the other situation manuals are on the webpage. So no, the tabletop challenge itself does not need to be completed by August 12th. Again, this is just the deadline for the situation manual that you'll be submitting on the Google form. We hope you don't have your tabletop exercise done by August 12th, because we want to see this as your plan to run one. Like I said, most challenge winners in 2024, they were all alerted if they won the prize in late 2024, about December, January. And then they all ran theirs kind of going from April to August of 2025. So again, they all basically did it 4 to 7 or 8 months even after they were awarded the prize. So we hope you haven't run the exercise yet, is the idea. And we just want to see the situation manual. What outcomes that were a result from last year's tabletop activities are still active? Are they able to reapply for a second year or continue their work? If so, what kind of public after action reports were produced? So anyone who won the challenge competition or has done a tabletop exercise already is welcome to reapply. They should make it clear on how this builds upon or is different from their original exercise, because of course we are looking for geographical diversity in our to fill some gaps in our map of who's run an exercise. So we want those to be a strong case of why they need to run another exercise. We definitely encourage that, but like I said, we want to see that they've built on their last exercise, or that they've advanced heat in some way, and maybe working in a new neighborhood, or how they've learned from that first exercise and why they need another. So they would need to make a case on why they would be continuing their work. And again, with the challenge winners, the after action reports have not been published on our webpage. But if you're interested in any of those communities after action reports or outcomes from the challenge winners, you can contact me and I can share them with you, or contact Mark and he can share you with us. And we just have not published them publicly. But the after action reports of the non-challenge winners are on heat.gov and the heat action planning webpage. But you can contact me and I can get you in touch, or send you specific after action reports or outcomes of those challenge winners as well. Okay, so we have a couple questions about using funds. So, can we use the funds in other ways to run the exercise? Getting a venue, food, logistics, etc., room reservations. Yes, that's actually where we kind of expect funds to go. We don't expect a lot of money to go towards developing the situation manual, because, you will be submitting that to us before you've received the funds. Of course, you can use it then to print the situation manuals and things like that. But if you win and we get 40 winners, you will have $25,000 to do as you choose to run the exercise. So we do expect those things to go to things like venue, food, logistics, room reservations, compensating participants for their time, childcare. Those are all great ways to spend your money doing an exercise. I don't know if Mark, if you want to hop in and tell them how you spent your $20,000. I know you hinted at that a little bit, but if you want to maybe talk about how you spent that money.
Yeah, I mean, the nice thing about working with a community organizer is that they sort of took it and ran with it, and we sort of held on for dear life. I mean, I joke, but like, since the money went to them, they decided how to use the money internally, and we just sort of co-created everything together. So I never really asked how the money got spent, but frankly, that's okay. That's also why we didn't want the money to come into our office, because if money comes to us, we either have to subtract it from our budget, or we have to, like, if it goes over a certain amount, we have to get approval from council. And then if we want to give money out, that's even harder without some kind of three bids or some kind of contract agreement. So having it go directly to the community organizer was actually a really great thing, and I'm glad you guys did that.
Yeah, and that's a good point too. If you want to if you still want to co-submit with someone, if you're working with a community-based organization if you to write this and there's multiple submitters, please specify on who would be receiving the funds, because we do have a limited amount of time between the end of the review period and getting the money into your bank accounts. So it's very helpful if you have multiple submitters to clarify to us which organization will be receiving the bank funds, because then we'll work with you to make sure you get that prize money into your bank account. So please let us know in your submission if there's more than one, who you'd like to receive the funds directly. And again, that's whatever is easiest for you all. But yes, we do want to see the prize money. And I know there's another question again about prize monies being used for emergency planning, SITMAN refinement, or creation. It can be, if you have money left over from the $25,000 and you ran your exercise and you need extra funds from that to provide heat relief for employees, that's fine. Again, we don't have tracking reporting requirements, but we do expect that this goes to running a tabletop exercise because of the amount of time you've hopefully put into developing a situation manual. So we do hope that most of the money goes to this exercise. But of course, like I said, in many cases, I think some had some funds left over and they used it to do additional discussions or more compensation, more heat relief activities, things like that. And again, if you have more questions on specific budgets, I didn't receive budget information from every challenge winner, but we do have some information from ones we directly supported. You can go money towards an evaluator. Some paid a facilitator to come in. Others had an employee just do it. Some had free space. Others had to pay money for the space. Most did, I think, provide lunch and beverages and things like that. So that's an expense. A best practice was definitely supporting nonprofits and community members to be there. So providing a stipend, things like that. That was definitely a lot that happened. So things like that, printing materials, so it is really up to you. But again, contact me or Mark or our team and we can maybe provide more examples if that's helpful. You can use it to hire a facilitator, yes. So yes, the situation manual is due August 12th, and that is the only item due. That's actually all you can submit in the Google form besides the basic contact information that the Google form will be collecting. Then you will submit the PDF of the situation manual, and that will be what the judges look at. And they'll be looking at through using that criteria I mentioned. So those scenarios will be completed later. Anyone else have any questions? I think I've addressed all of them. I'll give it a minute in the chat to see if any more come through. All right, well, I'm not seeing any, but again, please feel free to reach out to us and ask questions. Again, you can always reach out to us until August 12th. We'll be answering. We'll answer your questions within hopefully a day or two of business hours within reason. So please reach out to us and share this webinar with your colleagues and other folks who are interested who weren't able to make it today. As I mentioned, it is being recorded, so it will be posted on heat.gov. And yeah, I know it, and I want to reiterate too that I mentioned in the beginning. We've talked a lot about how you can spend that money, and that it is up to you how you want to run your exercise and how you want to utilize the $25,000. We also do want to make sure it is you include a compounding or cascading hazard in addition to heat, and this doesn't have to be a natural hazard. It can be a social compounding hazard as well, like a rolling blackout. And that we also want to make sure you have incorporated time to focus on long-term heat resilience as well, not just dealing with the short-term response. And that is what makes these our tabletop exercises unique. And that will, if you include those things, you'll have a strong situation manual. All right, one last call for questions. I'll give it 30 more seconds.
I can provide a little bit more information on the money spent. We did ask that each community members who participate get some kind of stipend, even if it's like $25 or $50. We did assume that the space itself would be air conditioned, so there was a certain amount of money for the space. We were fed lunch, and then there's a lot of small things like we provided pamphlets to everybody, so we had to cost for printouts, cost for a lot of sort of nicks and necks and things we just generally needed. So it does add up pretty quickly. $20,000 sounds like a lot, or $25,000 does sound like a lot, but when you actually start to spend the money, it goes pretty quickly. So it is super helpful. So thank you for that. But yeah, just thought I'd give a little bit more detail.
Yeah. And Mark, we do have one more question, I think, for you. What outcome was the most exciting to you? It's probably for you.
I think for me, it was great to have the report of all the feedback. It was great to sort of really clarify to public health, emergency management, and homeless strategy that our communication tends to be lacking, and like we don't really do a good job of connecting with the most vulnerable. But I think probably the most insightful or best was just sort of the awkwardness of people acting and sort of having fun, and that sort of made it memorable for people. And I think having city staff see that it's okay to talk to community members in this space, because I think there's a tendency for community staff or city staff to always get negativity from community members, like, why aren't you picking up my trash on Thursday, or like some kind of like, well, the city should blah blah blah. And I think this exercise built trust and built a certain amount of like rapport and trust between these community members and staff. And I think that's probably the best thing of all. And now we continue to talk to them. Our emergency management, our public health folks continue to talk to community members. So I think that's the part we can't really capture in a report, but probably is the most powerful.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. And again, like, you can find a lot of these great resources on our heat action planning webpage. And if you do want to learn more about other challenge winners from 2024, 2025, you can reach out to us and we can share with you those their submission situation manuals or reports if they give permission, and they're just not on heat.gov. But we're happy to share you some more lessons learned from that. But hopefully there's a lot of good resources on heat.gov. All right. Well, I'm not seeing any new questions, so I'm gonna probably end the webinar. Again, it will be recorded, and hope to see some great submissions on August 12th, and you'll hear from us in September, hopefully. So for those on the most of the United States, stay cool this summer, this weekend. This is a very relevant opportunity, and so hope you all stay safe. Thank you.